Hello students, I am Mr. B.S. Ravindra, PhD Biology, JNV Mandya, Karnataka. I am going to present you the video lecture on the chapter Heredity and Evolution. By this time you have already studied about the reproduction and the importance of DNA. Okay, now how an organism will reproduce the same kind of organism, that is because of the transfer of DNA from the parents to progeny. Say for example, you see here the duck will produce the duck, a panda will produce a panda, and a gorilla will produce a gorilla, rabbit will produce a rabbit, and a human being will produce a human being. How it is possible? It is possible that the characteristics of an organism will be transferred from parents to the offsprings or to the progenies, and thereby the continuity of the species is ensured. And this process of transfer of characters from the parents to the offsprings is called as heredity. Heredity is, in simple terms, we say that the process of transfer of characters or traits from the parents to their offsprings is called heredity. Okay. And when we observe the individuals of the population, all the individuals which are being derived from the parents will not be similar exactly. They are not the exact identical copies. Instead, we find that there are certain subtle small variations are there, differences are there. This is what is called the differences between the characters or the traits among the individuals of the same species which are produced from the parents are called as variations, and these variations are very important for the speciation that we are going to study in future. Okay, next is why do we study this heredity and the evolution together? Right, evolution is a process of gradual change which will lead to the process of speciation, which will lead to the formation of a new species that we are going to study in the later part. But why we are studying both these two concepts together? That is because they are very interlinked, right? So heredity is the basis of evolution. Okay, now variation, when we talk about variation, we see that, for example, human height is a trait in which we find some people are tall and some people are very short and some people are medium height, right? There are so many variations. We don't find only the people with the tall height or the short height, right? So there are so many intermediate heights are there. So that is one of the variation. Another example we can take, say for example, the ear lobe, that is the ear pinna. In some people we see that the lower part of the ear pinna is get attached, so attached earlobe, and in some people we find that the lower part is free earlobe. Okay, and these variations are very necessary for the process of evolution. The great advantages of variations. Why the variations will be inbuilt in the population? That means if the environment changes and the individuals which are having these favorable variations which are making the organism to adapt with the environment, they are going to survive. Say for example, let us assume that there is a population and that population can withstand the environmental temperature for about 40 to 45 degree. For any reason, say because of global warming, after 50 years the temperature will rise to 50 degree or 55 degrees Celsius. Then what happens? All the individuals of that population will die except those which are having the tolerance to the temperature. So they are the variants which are able to survive. That means variations will provide the benefit of surviving to the organisms, and later on that population will increase. What we can say will lead to the new populations or new species. Okay, that is. Then how these variations will accumulate, right? When an organism reproduces, offsprings will show minor variations due to inaccuracy in DNA copying. I think in reproduction chapter you have studied that before the reproduction the DNA is going to be doubled, right? And the 50% of the DNA is going to be transferred to the progenies, okay, or to the gametes. By means of gametes, the progenies are going to receive the 50% of DNA. So this process of copying, DNA copying, it is also called as DNA replication. And this DNA replication or copying is not 100% accurate. Instead, there are minor changes are there, right? So that is a little bit inaccurate. 0.01% of the DNA is going to be changed, right? So due to that inaccuracy, during the DNA copying, there is a variation that will occur, right? So variations are less in asexual reproduction compared to the sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction will show more variations. What is the reason for that? We know that asexual reproduction, only one parent is involved. That means whatever the inaccuracy in the DNA copying of one parent is going to reflect in the form of variations in the progenies. Whereas in case of sexual reproduction, generally two parents are involved. That means there is a DNA copying from both the parents. That means the amount of variations from the mother and as well as the father DNA is going to be transferred to the next generation. That means the variations will be increased. And another thing is, during the gamete formation, sexual reproduction, during the gamete formation, what happens? There is a process called as the recombination. That means the homologous chromosomes, they get a little bit of genes are going to be exchanged. That and all you are going to study in higher classes when you study in detail about meiosis and all. And because of that recombination also, there is a variation. Because of these two reasons, variations will increase in the sexual reproduction. That is the reason why more speciation is possible in the organisms which are adapted to the sexual mode of reproduction. And some variations are useful, and the variants, they help in the organisms to adjust to the change in the environment, and some variation do not help the organism to adjust with the changes in the environment, and they may not survive, they may die. Okay, so all the variations which arise out of the DNA copying or out of the reproduction, we may not be suitable, may not be helpful for the organism. The organisms which do not have the favorable variations, they may die. Only the organisms which have the favorable variations, they are going to survive and they are going to lead to a new species. Here you can see here, so there are two grasshoppers. One is here, what we say, you can see here this beetles. You can see that all are of one color and one will be of other color. Okay, so here we can see that if this particular individual get selected by nature, so then it will lead to a new species. During that evolution, we are going to talk in detail about this. So you can see here the butterflies are there. You can see the shape of the wings are different. Then the color of the wings are different. So many variants we can see. Observe the variation in this. So there are so many variations are there. The color of the wings, then the size of the wings, then the shape of the wings. They are all different. Okay. So variations are inbuilt in a population. Right. Here also you can see the beetles. You can see the color of the body, the markings on the body, all will be different. These are all variations in a population. So every population will not have the individuals of the same kind or will not be exact copies. Instead, there are variations are there. Now, let us take, for example, this is the accumulation of variation during asexual reproduction. Let us take this particular one individual is there that give rise to two individuals. Because of the inaccuracy in the DNA copying, there is a small variations. Here you can see in the head region there is a small variation from the parent. So this variation is there. Here in the second offspring, we can see that in the bottom region there is a small variation which is being shown in the form of green color. Okay, and here when this particular individual is reproduces, then it will inherit whatever the variation that is already present in the parent, and in addition to that it will get the variation, say in the sides you can see that there is a different color. Okay, so that means it will also have some more variation. So as the generations increases, variations keep on accumulating. So here the other the offspring is going to get the same variation which is already there in the parent, and the new variation here you can see. Here also you can see that the body color itself has changed in addition to the this green colored bottom. So that means as the generations progress, we find that the variations are keep on accumulating in the generation. Of course, in asexual reproduction, these variations will be less, and in case of sexual reproduction, the variations will be more. Then variations may or may not help the organisms to survive. Some variations help organisms to survive. There are some beetles living in a green bush. For example, let us take the example of a beetles which are living in the green bush. They increase their number by reproduction, but these crows, let us assume that in your textbook they are given that the beetle color is red. So these red colored beetles, they can be easily identified by the birds like crows, and they are going to be simply eaten upon, right? So they simply become a food for the birds, right? And their number will be decreased. Suppose as a variant in the population of red beetles, some of them are green beetles because it is a variation. That means during the DNA copying, the color of the body is slightly changed, and this cannot be identified. The green colored beetles cannot be identified by the crows or the predators, and thereby they will survive. The survival chances will be more. As they survive, their population also will increase. So this variation will help the beetles to camouflage themselves under the green color of the bushes, and thereby they are not identified by the birds. Okay, so this variation will help them to survive. And some variations do not help the organisms to survive. Say for example, in the same population of beetle, let us assume that blue colored beetles are produced and yellow colored beetles are produced in the population of red beetles. Then what happens? Both will not have any survival chances because both the blue color as well as the yellow color along with the red color, they are easily identified by the predators, and they can be easily, what we say, will be food for the predators. So they don't give the survival benefit to these organisms. Then there are some traits which are acquired traits. So the traits can be classified into two types: acquired traits and inherited traits. Inherited traits are the one which have been passed from the parents to the progenies, whereas acquired traits are the one which are being affected by the environment or acquired by the what we say the during the lifetime of an organism, right? So if the population of beetle increases, then for example they are in the bushes, and bushes get some diseases and their leaves and they are going to simply drop off, or the plants are going to be just vanish. Then what happens? There is a shortage of food. There is a shortage of food, and then thereby what happens? The weight of the beetles will also decreases, right? So that means weight will be decreased, but this weight decrease will not be transferred. It is not because of the DNA. There is no change. Suppose this is due to the shortage of food, and because of that this particular trait is not fixed in the DNA, and it is not going to be passed on to the next generation. And as the disease will be just vanishes and the plants will grow once again, then they get enough food, lot of food, and the size or what we say the weight of the beetle will increase. So gaining or losing of the weight is an acquired character due to the availability of food, and it is not going to cause any speciation. That is another thing. Then already we know that characters are transferred through DNA molecules. DNA are nothing but deoxyribose nucleic acid, which is present in the nucleus. Okay, present, and the DNA will have so many genes. So what is gene? Gene can be defined as it's a part of DNA. It's a segment of DNA which controls a particular trait. Okay, so DNA and gene is not a different thing. DNA part, if it is controlling a particular trait, we call it as a gene, right? When the DNA is inherited from the parents to the progenies, so these genes are also go along with that. So that means gene and DNA, they are not different. So part of the DNA which is controlling the trait is called as a gene, right? So the inheritance of characters is due to the fact that both the father and mother contributes equal amount of genetic materials to the child. So for each trait there are two factors, one from father and one from the mother. That means if you take the child or if you take the progeny will receive the genetic material from both father as well as the mother. 50% of the genetic material is from the father and 50% of the genetic material from the mother, or from male and female. That means a gene will have two copies, one copy from the male parent and the other copy is from the female parent. So a gene will have two copies. These two copies may be exactly similar or slightly different, right? So these two copies of the gene which are present in an organism will be called as alleles. We call it as alleles. You just observe this diagram. This is a cell, this is a nucleus. We find that there are chromosomes, okay, and these chromosomes are nothing but made up of DNA as well as protein. The two important things are there, that is the DNA and protein. If you take a single chromosome, you can see that DNA is highly coiled material. Okay, this is the DNA, right? So then if you just expand, it is a double helix or coiled it is containing two strands. Okay, these two are just joined like this. In higher classes you are going to study. Say for example, this particular part of the DNA is going to control it, right? We call it as a gene. Okay, a gene is a unit of DNA, is a part of DNA on chromosome or in chromosome, which transfers the characters from parents to their offspring. So it is the molecule that transfers or inherits from parents to the offspring during the reproduction. And a gene is considered to be the unit of inheritance or the unit of heredity, right? Genes for controlling the same character of an organism will be of two types, right? So will be of two are there. Out of that, when the Mendel, that we are going to discuss a bit later, when Mendel crossed the pea plants and observed, so one of the allele may be dominant. Dominant means that particular allele will express its trait and the other will not be expressing. That is what is called as recessive allele. Okay, so alleles are nothing but different forms of a gene. They may be exactly similar. If they are exactly similar, we call them as homozygous alleles. We call them homozygous alleles, similar alleles. And if they may be slightly different, say one gene will be having certain nucleotides and the other gene here and there is a small changes are there. So that is these two are the different forms. So if the what we say alleles are in different forms, then we call it as the heterozygous alleles, right? And this one we are going to discuss little bit later. Then the genotype is the description of the genes present in an organism. Genotype, the word we use, that is what type of the gene is present. Phenotype is the expressed character or a trait of the plant which is visible. That is what is called as phenotype, right? Genotype is the gene which is responsible for the phenotype. Phenotype is the visible trait. So say for example, a plant is a tall plant or whether the plant is a dwarf plant. Like that we are going to discuss. So here are some of the lists of the inherited traits. Right? Here you can see that the shape of the hairs here. This is what is called as widow's peak. It will be inherited from this person to the next offspring. So here we can see that the tongue can be rolled here, right? So here there is no rolling of tongue. Here you can see that the thumb is on the top, okay, and here you can see this particular finger is what we say larger than or longer than the toe, right? So some people will have this type of the fingers, okay. Then you can find here the little finger. little finger may be straight or slightly bent, and here you can see that there is a structure, Darwin's point. Okay, so here there is no Darwin point, right? So here also teeth, there is a gap, and all these things are there, right? Then you can see here earlobe, for example. In case of earlobe, what we find here, this ear pinna is completely free from attachment. Here it is not attached. And here if you see, the lower part of the ear pinna is get attached with the neck. So, right. So, this is a free earlobe. This is a, what we say, joint earlobe. Okay. So, that is also inheritable trait. Okay. So, this is an example of the acquired trait, right? So, here the size of this or the weight of this particular beetle is less, and here it is more because it is getting more food and all these things. Okay. Here you can see that a bodybuilder, right? So this bodybuilding is an acquired because of hard work, because of high nutrition. He got this muscle growth. That means it is an acquired trait. That it does not mean that this particular trait is going to be inherited to his progenies, right? His sons and daughters may not have this, right? So this is an example of acquired trait. Right. So there was one more acquired trait. For example, there was an experiment conducted. Right. So every generation they cut this particular tail of the mouse. So both male and female they cut and they mate, and the progeny, that is the offspring that is produced, will still have the big tail. Right. So that means cutting or what we say removing of a particular part during the lifetime of an organism does not guarantee that it is going to be inherited to the offsprings. That means that these are acquired traits. So what I mean to impress upon you is you must think that the acquired traits are not going to be transferred from parents to the offsprings, whereas the inherited traits, so that means if they are genetically fixed, then they are going to transfer from parents to the offsprings. Now, when we talk about this heredity, so generally heredity and variations will be studied together, and this branch of biology that deals with the heredity and the variations will be called as genetics. Of course, from the very old age, we know that variations are there in the nature, or even people have exploited this genetic mechanism of crossing the variants to get new hybrid varieties. That was always there, right? But they were not knowing the exact principles that are involved in the process of this inheritance, or they were not aware of how these are going to be transferred. And the first experiment or first scientific experiments were conducted by Gregor Johann Mendel. Gregor Johann Mendel conducted the experiments on garden pea plants, or scientifically they are called as Pisum sativum, and he could arrive at certain conclusion. So Mendel experiments are very important. But Mendel work could not be. So of course he published his book in 1865, right? All his observations, but it could not be identified by the world community. The reason for that is because at that time the communication was very less, right? So he could not communicate his findings to the other people. One thing. The second thing is he could not give the physical proof for what he called as factors. He was telling that he was not knowing these genes or the DNA, nothing was known. Simply he told that some unknown things, factors, right? He could not give the physical proof for the entire world. Where are these factors, right? So those factors he could not show to the people. That is another thing. And he used to express the percentages, ratios and all, he used maths, right? So mathematical calculation. But at that time the biologists were not convinced to use the mathematics to explain a biological phenomenon. It was new. But nowadays we have got a separate branch in biology, that is bioinformatics, where extensively we use this process of what we say the maths is completely used. And later in 1900, Mendel's work was discovered by three scientists independently. They were also working on plants and animals, and they found the same pattern of inheritance. They are Hugo de Vries of Holland, then Franz Carens in Germany, then Erich Teschenmark in Austria. So all these they have rediscovered the Mendel, and but the initially Mendel was the pioneer, was the first person to work out or to find out the principles of inheritance. So that's why Mendel is called as the father of genetics, classical genetics. But the rediscovery was done through these three scientists. Okay. Then a little bit we need to know about the history of Mendel. Mendel was educated in a monastery. Monastery is like a church, and went on to study science and mathematics at the University of Vienna. Failure in the examination for a teacher post, teaching certificate, did not suppress his zeal for scientific quest. He went back to his monastery and started growing peace. Right. Many others had studied the inheritance of traits in peas and other organisms earlier, but Mendel blended his knowledge of science and mathematics, and he recorded and was the first one to keep count of the individuals exhibiting a particular trait in each generation. This helped him to arrive the laws of inheritance. So, systematic study was carried out by Mendel, and he could note it down the trait that is expressed in each generation, and how many of them are showing this particular trait. Everything he kept record. Okay, this is the sample material. There is the garden pea plants, Pisum sativum, right? And it's there are certain advantages of this, right? Why garden pea plants were excellent sample materials or experimental materials for his experiment, right? The Mendel chose pea plants for studying inheritance due to the following reasons. The pea plants have variations of many traits. Many traits will show variations. Say for example, we see that the color of the seeds, yellow color and the green color, shape of the seeds, round seeds and wrinkled, or height of the plant, that is the tall plants and dwarf plants. So many contrasting traits are exhibited by pea plants. That is one reason. Then pea plants are self-pollinating as well as cross-pollinating. So self-pollination will provide pure breeding plants. So that means the alleles are fixed. Same alleles will be transferred from one generation to another generation. So there is the advantage of self-pollination as well as cross-pollinating. So in order to know how this particular trait will be inherited, cross-pollination is very important. That means the pollen grains of the other plant will be dusted or will be crossed with the one plant. That is what is called as cross-pollination. Then pea plants have short lifespan. So they are having 2.5 to 3 months of lifespan, and thereby we can study or he can study many generations. Many generations. So in any genetic experiments, it is necessary to choose a sample material which is having shorter lifespan, so that we are able to study more generation, and they can be cultivated, they can be grown very easily. So there is no special requirement for this. So garden pea plants can easily grow. And the progenies which are produced after the cross between two parents, the first generation he called as first filial generation, or F1 generation. Then the F1 generations are generally self-pollinated or selfed, right? And whatever the progenies which he got from the F1 plants, that is after selfing them, so that particular generation he called it as F2 generations, that is filial 2 generation. So here is the list of characters, 7 characters and 14 traits that were observed and on which the experiments were carried out by Mendel. Of course, Mendel carried out his experiment between 1856 to 1863, 7 years, and he chose 7 character. Say here, height is a character, seed shape is a character, seed color is a character, seed coat color, or sorry, this is the seed color, and this must be shape, right? Not the seed coat, it is the seed shape. Then pod shape, pod color, flower position, right? So these are the 7 what we say characters, and each character is showing 2 different traits. Here you can say height, tall plant as well as short plant. Then seed shape, we find round shape and wrinkled shape. Seed color, we find this yellow color and green color. And of course pod shape, inflated or full and constricted. Pod color, pod means fruit here. Green color and yellow color. Position of the flower, axial and terminal, and so on. Okay. Now afterwards we are going to, in the next video we are going to continue. Thank you.